Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be painting up a Rancor.
How are ya?
No, Rancor. Rancor. And we are going to be doing so using these incredibly crappy brushes. What I want to show you today is you don't need super expensive equipment. It's more important to use the proper tool for the job, and for this job, these brushes are going to be fine. We are going to be using a paint, wash, and stain technique, and for that we are going to need a very durable base coat to start with. I did begin in the airbrush booth with some light brown, however, airbrush paint tends to be a little bit delicate, and that's not going to stand up to the stress we're going to put on the paint job. So a heavy base coat with Vallejo Model Color Cork Brown applied with our very ugly number 10 flat brush is a perfect start for our washes. All the highlighting and shading is going to be taken care of via the washes, so we're not highlighting here. What I'm trying to do is get a little bit of color variation, adding a bit of a pink tone to around the face. A dry brush here works fine because we are going to be covering this washes, which is going to soften the roughness of the dry brushing. Also, for some more skin variation, a mix of camo black brown and charred brown, very roughly stippled, mainly on the back of our Rancor. A few other places. This is just to make the skin a bit more interesting. Obviously, we have 100% skin on this model, so any variation we can add will be a great benefit to our final results. And now we begin our wash process. We're just going to start off light until we figure out exactly what colors we need. So starting off with a very thin wash of Vallejo Model Color Flat Brown, and this is going over the entire model. You can see how this is adding a red tone to the skin, how it's settling in the recesses a bit. We are not slathering the paint on here, but we do want it to pool slightly. And for this, starting off with the number 6 brush, just to be sure I have the right amount of control. Once I was comfortable and realized we had enough color, we can switch over to the number 10. Obviously, the number 10 is going to hold a lot more of our wash, so you do have to be careful that you're not putting too much wash on. Just go ahead and wipe it or spread it out if you see it to start to pool. And as always with washes, it's better to go thinner than too thick. If you go thin, you can let it dry and apply another coat. If it's too thick, well, you're kind of stuck. Once that's dry, we go ahead and apply a second wash, again flat brown, this time a little bit thicker, and you can see I'm starting to build up the color on the back. Also notice that I am stippling the color on here. One thing to keep in mind when you're using the stain and wash technique here is you want to make sure you get even coverage. Especially on a very large creature like this, it's very easy to get obvious brush stroke lines, which I'll show you in a moment. So just stipple the color on until you build up the desired color. Obviously, the more layers you apply, darker color you're going to get. Our third wash, or second wash, however you want to count it, once again going back to our camo black brown and charred brown, and again building up the color a little bit darker on the back and also working this into the recesses. Also notice I've switched to a number 4 flat brush now. Started off with that horrible number 10, went to that mediocre number 6, and now we are at a number 4. The reason being is starting to work into the deeper crevices. We need a little bit more precision. Still using a kind of terrible number 4 flat, so not a whole lot of precision, but at least I can get into those deeper lines. Speaking of lines, this is what you want to avoid with this technique where you have obvious lines from your wash. When you're doing a big creature like this, it's hard to catch all these little boo-boos. If you're doing a smaller surface, it's going to be a lot easier. Just keep an eye out. You can see where the paint kind of pooled on the surface area. Normally you want to feather that area out before the wash dries. It's also a good reason to add a little bit of glaze medium to your washes. It gives you a little bit more working time so you can search all the little nooks and crannies to make sure you don't have any spots like that on your model. A vast majority of our paint job is now done, believe it or not. That took about 90 minutes to get to this stage. What I want to do now is start to add a little bit of color and just make the paint job more interesting, adding some color variation. For that, in this stage, using charred brown, mixing a little bit of model color violet into it, working this into the recesses and the dark areas just to give a very subtle hint of violet to those areas. You really can't notice it on camera, which is a good thing. With glazes, it should be subtle. Doing the same thing for our highlights, violet and gory red mixed. So you can see we started off with that light brown color, covered it with cork brown. We put flat brown on it, which is a reddish brown. Then we put some darker browns. Now we have violet. Now we have red. And because all this is applied via layers, glazes, and stains, we have a lot of variety in the skin, which makes it look a bit more natural and less Ken and Barbie skin tone. Moving on to the little bone spur things and using flat brown and heavy brown mix for that. Then we're going to highlight them with bone white. And now that we are starting to get more into the precision areas of the model, we do have to switch to a precision brush. So we have a relatively new number 2 for this. Just as a side note, some of the little nubs that you're seeing are actually nubs from the 3D printing sprue that I just left because I could paint them as part of the model. I am so sneaky. The bony ridge area, or plated area on the back, is small enough we could paint with a standard layering technique. However, because we used the stains and washes all over the rest of the model, if we painted this cleanly, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb. So because I want this to look like it's actually part of the creature, we're going to go ahead and use the same technique here, slightly different colors because we have a different color base coat that we are using, but the exact same techniques applied, using that number 4 again, and just wiping it off with my finger wherever there's a little bit too much excess. I'm skipping painting the mouth, mainly because I repainted it off camera. I didn't like how this came out. I just want to note that, again, as we start getting into the finer regions, that's when decent brushes come into play. Use the proper tool for the job that you're doing. Also, don't forget to blend the inside of the mouth to the outside of the mouth. You don't want a hard edge there. So I'm bringing this color around the lips. Does he have lips? Let's say lips. And then we can't just call the skin tone done. It's always getting tweaked. Realize I want a little bit more color here and there, so just stippling on some stormy blue. Remember, we started off with that stipple to get that mottled look to the skin. So I'm highlighting it here, which is some thin stormy blue. Again, very subtle bits of color. We don't want bright splotches of blue. We just want some variations of tone in the skin. And since we have those touches of color in the skin, I want the bony plate to blend in as well. So came up with kind of an odd concoction just to put on the sides. So there's a little bit of red in our bone to go with the little bit of red in our skin tone. Last but not least, decided to give it a overall complete glaze with Game Color Sepia ink. This is going to give a slight sepia tint to everything, really tie all the colors together. I admit I'm kind of not sure if I should have done this or not. I think I had my glaze a little bit too thick. I darkened the Rancor quite a bit, but I do like to show you everything I do even when I make mistakes. So I put a glaze on. That's what happened. But yeah, it does tie the colors together, but probably should have gone a little bit thinner with this. And there we have one finished Rancor. So this is what was a relatively quick paint job. I wasn't kidding when I said the main skin tone was done in about 90 minutes. Some of the details took a little bit longer, so a few days off and on painting this. But the stain and wash technique is great for doing skin tones to add variation and not get that plastic skin look. So it's a great technique to use on a creature like this. And as you saw, I did majority of the work using very crappy discount store brushes. As long as the bristles aren't falling out of the head, you can use almost any brush to paint depending on what you're doing, and that's the big thing. Big project, big terrible brush, slathering on paint, anything works. As you get into the finer details, you do need a finer tipped brush. But I think that is enough for now. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Watch out for snakes!